I made a video earlier this year about how quote-unquote cheap anamorphic lenses and adapters are becoming more and more popular to achieve unique looks in modern filmmaking. One of those lenses were the nanomorphs created and popularized by LAOWA. These were a budget Super 35 anamorphic lens series with a 1.5 times squeeze and an accompanying 1.3 times anamorphic adapter to make a 2 times anamorphic lens. Today, in addition to that, they have Super 35 anamorphic zooms, full-frame 2 times anamorphic lenses called Proteus, and they just announced full-frame nanomorphs, so you can be pretty confident they know what they're doing. LAOWA is also one of the more well-known brands in the macro photography and videography world, notably with their probe lenses that are hugely popular now, as well as their incredible stills and cine macro lenses, one of which I also made a video about last year. Recently, LAOWA being LAOWA decided to run straight into the face of the god of lenses, one of the leading manufacturers of high-end cine lenses in the film industry, Cook, and said, "Hey, f*** you and your $30,000 macro anamorphics, we're gonna make one for 6% of the price." And they did. This is the LAOWA NANOMORPH 60mm macro anamorphic lens. For some disclosure, LAOWA reached out to me to try out their Nanomorph 60mm macro for a few weeks before it's released. No money exchange hands, I do not get to keep this lens, and LAOWA does not have any input on what I say about this lens. You can support me though by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and commenting something fun and useful below. If you comment something dumb, I will infiltrate and destroy your Minecraft base. I believe this is a pre-production unit, and I have no intel on whether this is identical to the production units that will be shipped out to the customers, but any weird quirks or imperfections may very well just be pre-production bugs, so please keep that in mind. For sample images, we tested this lens on an FX3 for some full frame stuff in my backyard, as well as on Josiah's ARRI Alexa 35 with his wife and dog. Josiah was the DP and I pulled focus wirelessly. Go follow everyone here. But also keep in mind the majority of the exterior shots aren't exactly representative of how you would be using a macro lens, and that's precisely why you have the rest of the nanomorph set. Let's first talk about why this lens is significant. As you saw in my anamorphic adapter video and probably countless other videos talking about anamorphics, you're probably aware that anamorphic lenses typically have an awful minimum focusing distance. For example, the anamorphic adapter, which you have to focus the parent lens to infinity, has a close focus of about 80 centimeters. The closest I've seen an anamorphic lens get so far is 40 something centimeters, which is far from macro, and that's for the wide angle lenses that have a larger depth of field than a telephoto to begin with. This new macro lens has a close focus of an unbelievable 24 centimeters, which ends up being about 2 centimeters from the very front of the lens body. This allows cinematographers to bypass the use of close-up filters, or diopters as they're apparently incorrectly called, which could add unwanted chromatic aberration or distortion. According to LAOWA's interview with News Shooter in IBC 2024, this will be priced at $2,000 US. This is a significantly cheaper option than the macro anamorphic lens from Cook that I mentioned earlier, and has the clean, organic look of the rest of the set with no extra artifacts from needing close-up filters. This lens is not really nano for having the nanomorph name. Well, maybe relative to the Cook full-frame anamorphics, but either way, this weighs exactly 1,077 grams without the caps and is about 145 millimeters long from the front of the lens body to the mount. It's a pretty chunky boy. As with any other cine lenses, the focus ring and aperture ring have standard gears for a follow focus for a fizz unit. Both rings have about the same amount of rotational resistance. The focus throw is about 270 degrees. They have a hard metallic clang at each stop, which I'm honestly not a fan of at all. I wish there was some sort of cushioned stop so the metallic ping is not audible. For example, my dual lens primes have a hard stop as well, but the sound is well controlled and not as distracting. This sound becomes irrelevant though if you use a good wireless follow focus like the Tilta Nucleus M that has a virtual hard stop that stops a rotation right before the physical hard stop. That's a lot of stops in a sentence. The focusing is extremely slow up close, which makes sense as it's a macro lens, but precisely following gets very difficult even after around just 1.5 meters, where infinity comes at you extremely quick with a crazy tiny throw. When we were doing the testing outside and I was pulling focus off the nucleus, I was constantly rotating the focus wheel like half a degree at a time just for the focus to overshoot in either direction. This lens definitely seems better suited specifically for macro work than for standard use. It was pretty cool though to be able to rack focus from something immediately up by the lens to something super far away. This isn't something you can typically do with an anamorphic lens. The focusing elements are entirely inside the body, so this lens has excellent compatibility with any front or rear filtration. The aperture is fast, ranging from T2.9 to T22, so it will do great in lower lighting, especially when paired with a camera like the FX3, whose high base ISO is 12,800. This specific lens is in PL mount, but I do not have any info on whether EF or mirrorless options will be made in the future. The front filter thread is 77mm, matching the rest of the PL nanomorph set. The 77mm front thread also allows the use for their 1.3x anamorphic adapter without any step-up rings, which multiplies the squeeze ratio to 2 times. You do still need the 77 to 77 spacer ring, as the rear element of the adapter will hit the front elements of the lens. When it comes to sensor coverage, this lens is supposed to cover Super 35. When completely de-squeezed, the horizontal field of view will have a 60mm large format equivalent and a vertical field of view of 90mm. With a full frame camera like that of my FX3, there is heavy vignetting before the de-squeeze. After applying a 1.5x de-squeeze, you do slightly see a vignette wide open. Close it down all the way, you will get a hard oval around the image. So you'll have to zoom in all the way to Super 35 to get rid of all the vignetting completely. If you crop to 2:1 like myself, however, you only need to zoom in to around 1.3 times to get rid of the vignettes. On the Alexa 35, 4K and under will have no issue with vignetting. At either 4.6K open gate 3x2 or 16:9, you do see some slight darkening of the corners, since the sensor size is a couple millimeters bigger than a standard Super 35 gate size. Though again, these go away if the master is cropped to 2.4:1 or narrower. This specific lens that LAOWA sent has blue flares indicated by the blue ring in front of the iris markers, but will also have versions with an amber flare as well as a silver flare. I unfortunately do not have the rest of the nanomorph set to confirm whether the flares or general looks match, so I will not be comparing the looks in this video. Maybe for a video in the future. Wink wink. The horizontal flares are very well controlled. They only appear when an extremely strong source of light, like the sun, is going directly into the lens, and it creates a thin line across the image. On the Alexa, which has internal NDs, we just raw dog the lens with no filtration. And there is some heavy glaring going on that I didn't notice while doing my own tests, since I was using a matte box for the most part. These tend to appear when a strong light source, especially the sun, is hitting the lens at some angle, not necessarily head on. These glares instantly went away when we held up a hand above the lens like a flag, so this issue can easily be solved with a matte box or some sort of hood. But again, these tests were not also exactly the type of environment you would be taking a macro lens in. There is also a glorious secondary flare that's very reminiscent of the Soviet Mir 1 with rainbow angel wings blasting off the hard light source. When you get rid of a lot of the glare, there is also a pretty and subtle internal flare that looks like, I don't know, like a rainbow fish opposite the light source. Unlike the anamorphic adapter, this lens has a slight pincushion distortion. I say slight, but the only reference I had to test were these blinds and no specific scientific chart or anything, but you can see the distortion is very subtle, especially for an anamorphic lens. The bokeh stays almost completely vertical the entirety of the frame. And speaking of distortion, chromatic aberration is extremely well controlled as well. With anamorphic lenses, it's very common to get extremely red or blue CA around the bokeh. From what I've seen from this lens in person and from other images from other creators, the nanomorphs seem to be some of the cleanest anamorphics on the market without being so clinical and boring. With this lens, I really only notice a very slight warm glow around the outside and a very slight cool glow around the inside of the background bokeh, and that's only if I pause, zoom in like 1000% and pixel peep. When it comes to fringing, it's pretty much non-existent. The glass is exceptionally well made. Probably the most notable trait of an anamorphic lens is the oval bokeh, and of course, this has those too. But this being a macro and a medium long range lens, there is some uniqueness to them, and that's the size of the bokeh. Because you can get so close to the subject, the bokeh looks unusually gigantic in the background, even when the iris isn't wide open. A scene with many lights or leaves in the back will create a surreal look with thousands of huge ovals staring back at you. All the way at the minimal focus, the bokeh is so intense, typical of a macro lens, that it's somewhat indistinguishable that it's an anamorphic lens. The people who know what they're looking at could still definitely see these subtle anamorphic traits. There is some vignetting or distortion of the bokeh depending on the aperture as well. Here's an example. I put a light source about 1.5 meters away, and I panned and tilted the camera around to see how the bokeh changes shape. Of course, this is an extreme example as I'm focused all the way to MFD, but you get the point. The bokeh has some heavy cat's eye wide open, and it gets better as you close down. You do notice some of the focus breathing, especially when racking focus from minimum to any other distance, but it's typical to get that with an anamorphic lens to begin with. But this is emphasized by the fact that you can focus to virtually near zero distance. One thing I did mess up in some of the backyard test shots is that I accidentally had IBIS turned on, and it turns out the sensor has stabilization in the roll axis as well, causing some weird warping to happen with squeeze direction moving around. Definitely turn that stuff off before shooting with Anamorphics on this camera. In my opinion, as someone who doesn't professionally DP and messes around with lenses on YouTube just for fun, this is a fascinating lens, as are the rest of LAOWA's other innovative lenses with unique purposes and effects. It's not only a macro lens, but can focus to infinity to be used as a standard lens, although it's not as practically than a conventional anamorphic. It's got a special look, but it's still clean with plenty of space to be manipulated in post. From the testing, this would be a nightmare for a first AC if you decide to use this in a non-macro scenario. It's unnecessarily difficult to accurately pull focus farther than 1.5 meters. This lens should definitely be used in a controlled environment on a tripod or some sort of precisely controlled arm. That being said, no other lens under 32 grand is going to get you as close to any subject as this lens. So there you go, a rundown of this brand new lens. Huge thanks to LAOWA for letting me test out this lens, and I wish them the best with coming up with new groundbreaking ideas like this. I will leave links to the product in the description, as well as LAOWA socials, my socials, and the password to this YouTube channel. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and leave a productive comment. If you didn't like this video, watch this video at 0.5 times speed. So with that, I'm out. Stay safe, don't die. See ya.
How you just expect shit to change, and why they think respect come with fame. I bigged up myself through the pain. Now I'm big bro, I give game. I sat in my room for a year, just learning how to say this shit clear. I didn't have no choice, this was meant to be. Shout out all the people acting like they're friends with me. Want some from me, but don't check up on me mentally. It's all hustle, no love.